Welcome, everyone. On behalf of Louisiana Public Broadcasting and the Southern University Law Center, we would like to thank you for joining us for this virtual preview screening of Philly D.A. I'm Robyn Merrick, Vice President for External Affairs for the Southern University System. And tonight, with our distinguished panel, we will explore the issues just raised in this powerful Independent Lens docuseries. And we invite you to share your feedback with us by clicking the orange button on your screen that says participate in the survey, or clicking that same invitation you see in the chat box. One survey taker will win a year's membership to LPB Passport, the online streaming service of the best of PBS. This is the second of 3 LPB preview screenings taking place through June of Independent Lens films surrounding the issues of civil liberties and criminal justice reform. Now let's welcome our special guest and 3 expert panelists joining us this evening. Our special guest tonight is Josh Penn, New Orleans-based filmmaker and producer of Philly D.A. Mr. Penn is a producer with the Department of Motion Pictures and produced Beast of the Southern Wild, which was nominated for 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. He has produced Monsters and Men, 1,000 Thoughts, and Wendy, among others. And he was an executive producer on Patty Cakes, Western, The Great Invisible, and more. Mr. Penn is a member of the Academy of Motion Pictures and Sciences. He and the Department of Motion Pictures had 3 films premiere at Sundance 2021, including the program we're watching this evening, Philly D.A. And our 3 expert panelists this evening are Angela Allen Bell, she's an associate professor, and B.K. Agnihotri Endowed Professor at the Southern University Law Center. Professor Bell is a respected local, national, and international legal scholar and expert on civil and human rights, social and restorative justice, and the interplay between race and justice. It was her research that in 2018 successfully ended the use of non-unanimous juries in Louisiana. Next, we have Kelly Carmena. She's a criminal clinic supervising attorney at the Southern University Law Center. Prior to joining the faculty at Southern, Professor Carmena worked with the East Baton Rouge Parish Office of Public Defender as a felony and misdemeanor assistant public defender. During her 5-year term there, she served as lead counsel on a multitude of felony matters. And lastly, we have Alanah Odoms. She's executive director of the American Civil Liberties Union of Louisiana. As the first Black woman to lead the ACLU of Louisiana in its 65-year history, Ms. Odoms has answered the call to defend the Constitution and the Bill of Rights by challenging systemic and racial and gender injustice. Welcome to all of you. To our audience, if you are watching and you have any questions, just type them in the OV chat box. We might not be able to answer all of your questions, but we will get to as many of them as possible. So first up, I'd like to start with Mr. Penn. We have a question actually in the chat box. It was a question I was planning to ask as well. When and how did the film team come to pursue this story? And how difficult was it to gain this incredible access that you were able to get with Larry Krasner's office and even the community and those in opposition?
Sure. So first off, thank you for everyone for watching and for you guys for having us. So we started filming, when the team started filming, it was still very much a long shot that Larry would even win. The directors got wind of the fact that he was running this kind of unlikely campaign and thought, well, maybe he won't win, but something interesting will come. Maybe we should, film it, and didn't necessarily know what would come of it. But then he won, and they were kind of ready. He was used to them. He knew them. And so they said, hey, could we continue filming? And he said yes. And saying yes is kind of actually the easy part. The hard part is then actually giving someone access to your life in that way, and be it your professional or personal life. I'm sure you get some sense watching the first episode, but we shot, hundreds and hundreds of hours in there. And I think the thing that made us stick with it, and this is many years ago now, this is, started in 2017, was that he gave access not only to himself, but to his entire team, and kind of let us film things that I think have never been filmed before in any DA's office, let alone one that was kind of undergoing this huge kind of change and really trying to change the system. And so the directors kind of got obsessed, and the doors just kept open. And I mean, even all the way through post, the directors could kind of just go in and film when they wanted to film, and that was the rule. And we were able to capture some pretty amazing things. And I got involved about 6 months after, 6 to 9 months after Larry, 6 months after Larry won, 9 months after we started filming. And it was the access that really blew me away and made me decide I had to join this team. The first thing I saw, I was working on a shoot that Yoni, one of the directors, was just the cinematographer for. And he said, oh, small talk. And he said, I'm working on this documentary with Larry Krasner. We have full access to his office. And I knew, about Larry. And so kind of my ears perked up, and I asked him if I could see footage. And the first thing he showed me is the first thing that ended up being in the series, that meeting, that first policy meeting where they're just kind of almost casually saying well, what if we just change the system in these kind of fundamental ways? I immediately thought this could be I've never seen anything like this. It felt like the West Wing to me, except real life. And so I joined the team and have been working on it for many years since.
That's incredible. And Mr. Penn, I just got to tell you, I'm obsessed now after this first episode. I cannot wait to see the rest. We're certainly obsessed just with the notion of how he was able to win at a time where just the odds were all stacked against him, and no one had ever done anything like that. And then after he gets in, to see the direction that he's going so quickly in his work. So this is a great tease for the rest of the series, yes. The rest of this docuseries.
And one thing I should say is just in terms of the access, because I realized you didn't answer that question fully, I really commend Larry for is, there have been lots of docs that people do this and come to regret it because, they end up getting embarrassed by it. And early on, the director said, why are you giving us this much access? And he said, I ran on transparency. I believe in transparency. And this is I have to be transparent to you too. And if I do a bad job, this should be a report card. And if I do a good job, it can allow everyone else to see how we did it. And it can be a learning tool. And I remember that was knowing that was the thought behind it. And he really stuck to that, which I think you can really feel that kind of attitude of just put it all on the table and let people decide what they want from the very beginning to the end.
It's pretty revolutionary to take that approach, to sort of he almost feels like he has nothing to lose, but he's out there doing it. So, hey. Yeah.
I don't know if I'd have that much bravery in my job.
Exactly. As an elected official, or even as a private citizen in your private jobs, I mean, that's a lot of moxie to do that. So Professor Bell, I'm going to switch to you now. And those of you here actually everyone's here in Louisiana. But I do want to highlight this conversation as it relates to Louisiana. So relating to the issues raised in Philly D.A. to the criminal justice system in Louisiana, do you see obstacles to reforms like this in our state? And if so, what are those obstacles?
Well, our funding system is certainly an obstacle because in Louisiana, we use something called a non-unified approach to funding our judicial branch of government, which means that we do not fully fund the judiciary with state funds. Most other jurisdictions prefer to use something called a uniform court system, where their taxes and other assessments actually are used to fund the judicial system. There are consequences to what we do in Louisiana, and they are not positive in any way. The non-unified system creates a very perverse incentive to impose fines and fees on citizens as a means of them funding the judiciary. And these fines and fees are often excessive. It also provides an incentive to the actors in the system opposing meaningful criminal justice reforms because they can possibly view reforms as a threat to the financial plans of their particular arms of justice. So for those who are hearing this and wondering if I might just in fact be overstating this, you might want to focus on 2018, when at that time she was the Chief Justice of the Louisiana Supreme Court. And she stands before the Louisiana legislature as she gives her State of the Judiciary, Chief Justice Johnson, and she acknowledges, and I am going to quote for a second, there is no central oversight, she says, in the assessment or collection of court costs. There is no accounting. And then she says, and I'm quoting, let's be candid, innocence in Louisiana is currently bad for our bottom line. This is the Chief Justice of the Louisiana Supreme Court. A second obstacle in Louisiana is a lack of discipline for prosecutors who engage in intentional misconduct in the state. Now, we have rules, so there is no uncertainty as what the boundary lines are. Prosecutors know they should refrain from prosecuting a charge where the prosecutor knows there is no support through probable cause for the pursuit of those charges. Prosecutors know that they are to share with the defendant's attorneys evidence that could negate guilt, evidence that might mitigate the offense. And existing in Louisiana along our many ethical prosecutors are a known set of problem prosecutors in this state who violate those two rules with impunity. Right now, there's about 43% of our wrongful convictions that we attribute to that official misconduct. Louisiana has a pattern, it is not a few, that has gone before the United States Supreme Court only to have them reverse these cases and document this bad behavior in the state. We know there should be zero tolerance for this in the same way there is zero tolerance for crime. Yet local judges often do not refer these bad actors for discipline. Many district attorneys do not address these offending assistant district attorneys. The Office of Louisiana's Ethical Complaints for the Office of Discipline Counsel, they often don't pursue any charges in these cases. And then the added problem of prosecutors being immune from suit. So this culture is an obvious obstacle to achieving these types of progressive reforms that we're here to talk about tonight.
That is so critical that we raise the culture of Louisiana in the context of making meaningful reform in our state. And it's certainly something that is not going away. It is who we are and must be dealt with along the way. So thank you for that response, Professor Bell. Professor Carmena, I want to come to you next. As someone who was a former public defender, you've done this work. What do you think about the issue of cash bail? Specifically, do you think it should be eliminated for minor offenses to reduce incarceration rates?
I 100% believe that cash bail should be eliminated within Louisiana. And it's not so much the incarceration rates that I'm concerned with, although it is. I don't want anybody to think that that's not an issue that exists within Louisiana. The biggest issue with our bond system, not only in Louisiana, but in most states in our nation, is that it is a privatized business. And so you have these private companies that are making thousands, if not millions of dollars off of our citizens who can't afford to bond out themselves. And so they're having to go through a bondsman. They don't have someone who could sign them out. They are essentially being the people who are determining who gets to stay in jail and who gets to get out. And obviously, if you are a poor person, you are not going to be able to afford that bond, even by paying a bail bondsman, because you have to pay in Louisiana, you have to put up 12% of your bond through a bail bondsman, whether you're guilty or innocent. And 10% of that, the bail bondsman's pocket, 2% of that goes to the state for them to do whatever they do with. And so then you have people who may have already had a hardship financially, and now they have an additional hardship because that's a civil contract with someone outside of the criminal system that they have to pay regardless of whether or not they are found innocent. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you're able to put up your own bond, cash bond yourself, or you put up property or someone bonds you out by signature bond, well, then all of that comes back to you. But most people can't afford that, right? So you go through a bail bondsman, and now you have, if your bond was $50,000, you now have a $6,000 debt that you're paying to this private bail bondsman. And I just feel like there's something significantly immoral with us allowing this private institution to determine who gets to come out of jail and fight their charges and who has to stay in jail. And ultimately, those who stay in end up not fighting their charges simply because they want to get out of jail. So they will plead guilty to a charge that maybe they are actually not guilty of, simply to get out of jail, to have it finished, to be able to go home to their families and go back to work and be with those that they love. I do understand that there is a need for maybe some type of bond system for crimes of violence. I don't think any of us are saying that we want rapists or murderers out on the street. That's not what it's about. It's about the actual access to justice that poor people are just not getting because they can't afford it.
Yeah, that was probably the most heartbreaking part of what we saw in this first episode with the young man who said he had been in for 8 months. And I don't know what his crime was or what the allegations were against him, but that was a hard pill to swallow. And even it was very moving to see that group that goes out to help bail out everyone. So Ms. Odoms, I know the work that you do deals directly with individuals. And I want to come to you next. The ACLU of Louisiana is based in New Orleans, and that city has a newly elected progressive DA in the name of Jason Williams. And like Philly D.A. Krasner, Williams has a background as a defense attorney and is seeking to institute reforms as DA. So there's some similarities there. So what are the opportunities and challenges right now for those reforms advocated by DA Williams in New Orleans that might be shared values with the ACLU?
Yeah, so absolutely. Thank you so much. And I love the film, so I'm excited to be here with Josh, and nice to see Kelly and Angela as well. And their points were so salient. I was an assistant district attorney under former DA Leon Canizero, one of the most notorious DAs in the entire country. Look at Kelly shaking her head. Surprise, surprise. I did that back in 2008 and 2009 because I like to give myself a little bit of credit, but like this progressive prosecution movement that we've seen in the last decade or so gain favorability was something that was totally disfavored at the time that I went to the DA's office. And I kind of get chills like thinking about these backroom meetings because I participated in a lot of policy setting conversations just like the DAs that were sitting around the table. And those are the same conversations that are happening in New Orleans right now, where the district attorney is making significant and seismic transformations in the policies, everything from deciding not to lodge objections to parole and pardon considerations, to providing 22 people with new trials based on the fact that they were convicted on non-unanimous jury verdicts, Professor Bell's research, to thinking about the way that the multiple offender statute is used. That's all DA discretion. To determining whether to enhance someone's charge based on whether they were convicted of a crime in the past. Looking at the amount of time that the district attorney has to file and institute charges under our 701 release bill. The ACLU actually has a groundbreaking bill, HB 46. Today's the first day of our legislature convening, and we are seeking to reduce the amount of time that all DAs across the state of Louisiana have to bring charges. On any charge, even a misdemeanor, the DA has up to 45 days to institute charges for that crime, which means people can sit for possession of a Schedule II drug for 45 days if they cannot afford to pay bail. We want to bring that. We want to change that, and we want to reduce it from 45 days down to 5 days. We know it can be done because there was a pilot in Baton Rouge. District Attorney Hiller Moore instituted an expedited arraignment process and got folks in and out in 3 days. We know that there were many challenges to that program, and it was discontinued, but it didn't have to be. And we know that we can charge people and we can expedite the dropping of charges a lot quicker than 45 days. And on the more serious charges that are 90 and 120 days, we want to bring that down to 30 days. And so we know that the district attorney in New Orleans is in favor of this new legislation, which would change the statute. And then that would require that all 64 district attorneys institute this policy. But that's the challenge, right? We're a patchwork quilt in Louisiana, just like Professor Bell said. Every single time we make a change, we have to go parish by parish. We have to go individual by individual. We have to go jurisdiction by jurisdiction, which means that if you are in a large jurisdiction that is well-funded, that has a lot of resources, that has a lot of power, you may be able to make changes pretty quickly. If you are in a rural jurisdiction where you have very few resources and you have very few resources in terms of the personnel that work in your court, and people are not being seen in court as regularly in order to have their bond set quickly, those parishes have difficulties. And those judges also, of course, have a more perverse incentive to find more people guilty so that they can pay for their law clerks and pay for their lighting and pay for their furniture and all of these kinds of things. So a very perverse financial incentive goes on in Louisiana because of our funding structure. I think we have a tremendous amount of hope just from what I've seen in the chat from my fellow panelists. Why? Because Professor Bell is encouraging young people to become district attorneys. Professor Carmena is also making that same recommendation. I've been making the recommendation since I was straight out of law school in 2008 because it's my first job, and I think that we need social justice minded people in these positions. You need fair people on both sides. And I really believe that we've got a movement coming. We've got Larry Krasner as a wonderful role model. We have Aramis Ayalas. We have Kim Fox. We have Chief Justice Johnson, who made it her mission in her administration to remove the stain that Louisiana has of being the most incarcerated place in the world. And I worked directly with her on that mission. And of course, we're not done. And I think there are young people who are going to take up that mantle, and I encourage them to do so.
Thank you, Alanah. I appreciate that. Watching this film, this first episode again, was very much a reminder of the power that a district attorney has. And I don't think that's not something that we think about on a daily basis. But it certainly really highlighted that point for me and probably for some others, because we have a question in the chat that has come to us. And I think I want to direct it to you, Alanah. I know you just responded, but this may be something, the work of the ACLU, if you can help guide this question. And that is, what role do we have as community members in ensuring that our local DA is being fair in his or her duties? Are we to only become a part of the system when a crime has been committed and we know the victim or the defendant? That's when, a light is shown on the DA's office, but not necessarily the day-to-day. So what would you recommend?
I love that question, and thank you. So you heard in the film, directly impacted people put Larry Krasner in office, and directly impacted people put Jason Williams in office, and the community are the most significant catalyst for change in terms of any elected official's office. But that means that we've got to participate in these elections. So in 2019, or we're in 2020. I can't remember now because of COVID. No. Almost every single DA was up for election. It wasn't just Jason Williams. The entire state had all of the DAs up for election. And we had lots of national press and attention on what was happening in New Orleans, but we didn't have a lot of press and attention on what was happening in Baton Rouge, We didn't have a lot of pressure and attention on what was happening in Shreveport, in Monroe, in Lafayette. And the thing is, we have got to help people understand that district attorney elections, just like one of the folks who was filmed in the documentary stated, are sometimes as important, if not more important, than who the president of the United States is, because it directly impacts every single day who will be behind bars, who will be released, what that person's opportunity will be, whether your children will continue to be able to be on a trajectory of going to college, or whether they will be derailed because of a drug conviction, which we know that largely African-American people are prosecuted at 3 times the rate of their white counterparts, which we know young people using marijuana on LSU's campuses, they're going to be great. Young people using marijuana in downtown in the French Quarter of New Orleans are not going to be great. So we have to recognize that we've got to pay attention to when these elections come up, and we also have to pay attention to what's going on in the legislature. We will have several key bills that are going, including HB 46, that are going to impact how our system runs, criminal system runs, and we need people to participate. So the ACLU is going to do a work the legislature, learn how to become active in your legislature on this coming Thursday evening. I'll go to laaclu.org. It'll teach you how to become involved in the legislature, but you have to be involved in local elections for DA. You have to be involved in the legislature, and you have to make sure to vote for people and hold folks accountable. And if they're not representing your values, you have to turn out and vote for the opposition.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for that, Ms. Odoms, for that response. And thank you for that question that came from our audience. I do want to remind everyone that we want to hear your thoughts on Philly D.A. So you also have the opportunity to hear from fellow viewers. So we ask that you click the orange button or the link that LPB has shared in the chat box. We want you to take the survey and respond. And remember, we have a prize that will be awarded for those survey participants if you are chosen. But we definitely want you to share your feedback. That helps as we put things together here, both at the university and at LPB, making certain that we are bringing you the kinds of stories and kinds of information that you want to hear. We have another question in the chat that I would like to direct to Mr. Penn, and it's about the Fraternal Order of Police. And that question is, when the Fraternal Order of Police spokesperson said nothing can happen without their support, how accurate is that statement?
That's a good question. I don't know if he meant it in a legal way. That's not the case at all. But I think what he was implying or saying there, and what Krasner's administration found to be true, is that the police department and district attorney's office traditionally has worked very much hand in hand.
Right.
And I think previous administrations probably were very hesitant to cross the police department or the FOP. And Larry's done a lot of things without their support, clearly. I mean, I think very rarely have the two seen eye to eye, and he's, whether or not you like who you agree with, he's accomplished a certain number of things. But yeah, I think it's I don't know what the term would be for non-official structural, support or partnership that can really get in the way and can come up the wheels if there's opposition, which is what I think there's a real attempt to do.
Yeah, clearly, he was able to win the office without their support.
Which is very, very unusual.
Correct, very unusual. So in terms of the reform measures, and Kelly, I'm going to pass this question over to you. I'm sorry, Professor Carmena. Pass the same question over to you, having worked on that side in public defense and working for our local parish here in East Baton Rouge. The experience with the Fraternal Order of Police right now is a bit of a challenge as it relates to our police department and the police leadership. But how does that spill over into the DA's office in terms of really being able to effectuate change?
Now, I will say at the DA's office in Baton Rouge, we do have a fair number of progressive district attorneys. So it's really kind of half and half. But what you will still find with certain ones is if a officer does not agree to a charge being dismissed, they tend to listen to that officer. Even though they have all the power in the world, they will ask their officers on a case their opinions to figure out what they need to do. And I've actually had an officer before curse out a district attorney in front of me in court, not on the record, but we were off the record. And we both told this particular officer, this is the worst case in the world. It's got to go. And because she exercised that authority, the officer blew a gasket. So a lot of times you will find that the prosecutors will listen, and I'm sure the smaller parishes are even worse than what Baton Rouge is. They listen to their officers that worked a case before they will settle a case or dismiss a case or, whatever the case may be. They have a lot of power and pull in the prosecutor's offices.
And one thing I feel like is important to clarify that we get into more as the series goes on is the FOP is different than the police department.
Right.
So the FOP is like the union. They're sort of almost like a lobbying organization. And so in the case of Philadelphia, the FOP was much more consistently aggressively in battles with Krasner's office than the police department, which certainly there were, issues that came up between them, but it wasn't quite the same intensity. And there's something interesting. I learned a lot about this distinction in the process of making the show, but there's something interesting that the FOP, at least in Philadelphia, is a lot of retired police officers from another era, and they're the most active people. So, but they're also pushing a lot of the agenda. And so you're sometimes getting like the most extreme of that viewpoint from the lobbying organization.
Yeah, thank you for adding that, because that is so important to note. And I guess really wanting to underscore and watch that work of a said police union and the power that they exercise, not only in the police department, but over in the DA side as well. Professor Bell, I want to come to you next, and then we have lots of great questions in the chat. Let me just tell you, thank you, audience, for everything that you're sharing. It tells me that you've enjoyed what you're watching and that you will continue to watch this docuseries as it rolls out over the next several weeks. So Professor Bell, I want to touch on race because we haven't talked about that directly. The film suggests that there is racism to be confronted when criminal justice reforms are undertaken. Is that the case in Louisiana as well? You did mention that a bit earlier.
Yes, most definitely. And to understand this, it's really going to require us to take our historical journey all the way back to the 1800s, when you have to understand that when the Civil War happened and when the 13th Amendment was enacted, Louisiana had not changed its position on slavery. Those changes were forced. So Louisiana, if it had its way, would have continued the business of slavery, which in fact was this state's first mass incarceration system. We need to never divorce these current reforms from that historical reality, because all today's criminal justice system is an expanded version built on that same foundation. So how did this happen? Many people do not understand that those former Confederate generals and Confederate officials, when they lost the Civil War, they did not go into retirement, take their pension checks and settle down. They just changed into legislative wear, many of them. And they were the key players in shaping this new thing called our penal system post 13th Amendment. So the prison Angola, it was actually a plantation owned by a former Confederate general. And it is this gentleman who introduced the idea of post 13th Amendment convict leasing. So how does convict leasing work? You cannot lease a convict unless you have those bodies. So one of the first things we did after the Civil War was change the way we criminalize this newly freed population. I said freed because that would be short-lived. We started criminalizing things that were never criminal before, only to get people into this convict leasing system. Mm-hmm. So what we did was tell the world that this was about public safety. And soon the numbers started to suggest to us through the census that really there was a public safety problem. But in fact, this was a veiled attempt to reinstitute that very system of free labor that Louisiana was not ready to separate itself from. Now, civil rights gains have been achieved in almost every era of American life, housing. We know that those things have happened, but with criminal justice reform, it has not happened yet. It is one of the last places in America where we tolerate bias and racism. And Louisiana's criminal justice system disproportionately affects African Americans on all fronts. We are 32% of the state's population and 70% of the state's prison population. African American children are imprisoned in this state 7 times the rate of whites. Louisiana has not executed a white person for killing a Black person since 1752. 91% of all of the people right now serving life without parole for nonviolent offenses are African Americans. Louisiana judges routinely allow Louisiana prosecutors to engage in illegal jury discrimination. So I wish I could tell you that this were only racism, but it is worse than that. This, in fact, is systemic racism in Louisiana, and that is the challenge that we must confront.
You know, I wish we could go another hour, but our time is upon us. There is so much to talk about and so much that this film, this first episode, I cannot underscore enough, that is brought to our attention and our level of consciousness about this. And so the audience, I want to share with you yet again, 1, thank you for all of your great questions. I'm sorry we could not get to all of them. And 2, please take a moment and take the survey. At some point, we want to get your thoughts on this so that we can continue to craft these kinds of conversations and programming for you. I would like to then now thank Mr. Penn, Professor Bell, Professor Carmena, Ms. Odoms. Thank you so much for your time and all that you've shared with us this evening. I really wish we had more time. And for those of you attending, watch your email as we will send you the survey. And in case you have not yet shared your feedback, we want you to still do that. Survey, survey, survey. Don't want you to forget that. And remember, when you complete it, you will be entered into a drawing to win a free LPB passport membership. That means you can pull up all the PBS programming at your leisure. And I want to remind you too that Philly D.A. premieres on LPB next Tuesday, April the 20th at 8 p.m. And it continues each Tuesday at 8 p.m. through June 1st. So we have a lot to catch up on and watch, and maybe we can come back together and have a conversation about everything we've seen from April to June on this Philly D.A. program. And again, thank you, Mr. Penn, for all the work that you've done. Once again, in addition to our wonderful guests and our panelists, LPB would like to extend our thanks to our partners who helped to make this evening possible for us. That is the Southern University Law Center, Southern University, Independent Lens, and the Independent Television Service, that's ITVS. And thank you also to the Promise of Justice Initiative for supporting this event and the work that you continue to do. So support is being provided by Independent Television Service, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, PBS, Acton Family Giving, MacArthur Foundation, the Weinkapp Foundation, and the National Endowment for the Arts. So we want to thank you again for joining us. I'm Robyn Merrick, wishing you all a very good night, and thank you again for being here.